allow us to get into a variety of special topics that are, I wouldn't necessarily say they're advanced, but they're a bit more specialized, and so there's no time to get into them in the core course on statistics. But they're topics that, or techniques or tools that I've found over the years are often quite useful for master's group projects and PhD projects as well. I know there's PhD students in there as well. So it's going to be a little different from a typical course in that there's not kind of this clean arc of, you know, introductory stuff, more advanced stuff, and really fancy stuff at the end. It's really going to be more a kind of series of topics. So if we look at the syllabus, you see that? So it's in order to the first thing is just the schedule. We'll be meeting in here on Tuesday mornings, and this will be primarily lecture and a bit of discussion. And then on Thursdays we have a 2-hour session in the GIS lab, and depending on the week, that'll be either some demonstrations or a sort of back and forth between demonstrations and time for you to work on stuff, or some weeks just time for you to work on assignments with me around there to help out. And also, there'll probably, since this is the first time I've taught most of this material and I don't have a good sense of how long it's going to take to explain it, there may well be some spillover of lecture material into the lab session as well. But I wanted to have one of the 2 sessions in the lab so that we can get some real hands-on stuff. So there's two big topics that we're definitely going to cover because those come up quite frequently. The first is multi-criteria decision analysis, which is a whole bucket load of techniques for making decisions or prioritizations when we're dealing with lots of different criteria. And so that'll be roughly the first 3 weeks of the course, and we'll start that today. Then the second big topic, and I should say, no, I'll come back to that. So then the second third of the course will focus on spatial data analysis. And I imagine some of you took Fru's GIS class last year. How many of you took the GIS? Just 2 of you. Okay, 3. Okay. So this will be a somewhat different approach to spatial data analysis, and it's really focused on some of the statistical aspects, but we will cover some of the same material in terms of looking at how to do smoothing and interpolation, and dig in a little bit more into the guts of what's going on there and how to interpret the results at a somewhat deeper level than you did in GIS. So even if you've had GIS, this won't necessarily be review. And we'll introduce some new techniques too in terms of how do you decide. There's lots of different ways to interpolate spatial data. We'll look at some quantitative ways to decide which ones are better. And also, how do you, coming back to sort of traditional statistics with regression analysis, when you have doing regression analysis on data that's spatially autocorrelated, that violates one of the fundamental assumptions of regression, ordinary least squares regression, which is that the residuals are uncorrelated with one another. And so we'll talk about how to do regression analysis with spatial data. And then, so those are the sort of, and that'll probably be about 3 weeks as well. And then after that, I have a sort of list of ideas of topics that I think are interesting, but I also want to get your input as to what would be the most useful tools that you foresee coming your way. I'm going to sort of get some preliminary feedback on that today, but as we go through the next few weeks, I'll be reminding you to think about that, and then we'll toward sort of in the middle of the quarter, we'll pin down more precisely what we're going to be doing at the end of the course. So the topics that I've thought about that are potentially useful to cover, and we certainly can't cover all of these in any depth. We could probably do maybe 2 of them. The first is analysis of censored data. So especially in a lot of environmental monitoring, for example, water chemistry monitoring, or looking at beach contaminations, that sort of work. There's often a threshold below which there's basically a no detect threshold, which is greater than 0, right? So if the E. coli concentration is less than say 5 parts per billion, the tools don't, the physical analytical tools, chemical tools aren't going to detect it, and so you basically have missing information. When you have that no detect, you don't know whether it's a true 0 or something else between 0 and that threshold. And so there are a set of techniques for analyzing such data that explicitly take into account this censoring and give you a more reliable estimates of trends or relationships in a regression model and so forth. And this is common in sort of environmental monitoring. In more kind of wildlife biology, we often have what's called zero-inflated data. So for example, suppose you're counting, what might you want to count? San Joaquin kit foxes, okay, which is an endangered species. And you've set out a bunch of survey areas, and you go out and you survey for kit foxes, and you want to understand, what are the factors that influence the abundance of kit foxes. And the problem is that there are sort of 2 kinds of processes that go on. There's potentially a process that says this is completely unsuitable habitat, right? So some type of habitat will be completely unsuitable, and so you will always have a 0 there. But other habitats may be suitable to some greater or lesser degree, but the number of kit foxes that are actually there to be counted on the day you go out will be some kind of random variable, and it might even be 0 that day, even though it's suitable habitat. So you tend to get funny distributions with lots of extra 0s, and so this and sort of standard regression analyses and t-tests and so forth really don't deal well with those. So there's a set of tools for dealing with those kind of data. So those are sort of both kind of specialized techniques to deal with commonly encountered data weirdness in different kinds of environmental applications. How many of you took 206 last year? Okay. So did you talk at all about bootstrapping?
Yeah.
To a degree where you understood how to use it?
It kind of got cut off towards the end of the course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But and that's for those of you who didn't have, who's never heard of bootstrapping in the context of statistics? Okay, so everybody has a general notion of what it is. So so one option would be to get in more depth into bootstrapping, which I guess also is about data weirdness when data don't follow a standard distribution. It allows you to get more another kind of more, what might be called a more advanced technique is Bayesian statistics. How many of you have encountered Bayesian statistics? Let's see, about a quarter of you. Okay, so this is a technique in which, well, it has various aspects to it, but one is that it provides a rigorous way of updating information and making use of prior information that you have before you go in and start the analysis. And it's, in some fields of environmental management, it's quite commonly used, and it's also, it's a nice approach because the way that your answers are expressed, when you talk about uncertainty, you can talk about uncertainty in a way that is much more intuitive than trying to explain classical confidence intervals, right? If you remember how ugly and convoluted and double negatory the sort of classic of the definition of a confidence interval was. This fits much better with how we actually think about uncertainty in our day-to-day lives. So that's another topic that we can delve into. And of course, there are many other topics we can do as well. So as we go through the first half of the quarter, we'll kind of zero in on what we want to focus on. There's no textbook. I'll be posting readings of various kinds as we go. And then, let's see, the grading, there'll be three major assignments, one on multi-criteria decision analysis, one on spatial data analysis, and one on whatever we do in the last part of the quarter. And in general, so one of the goals of this course is if you're doing a group project that requires one of these kind of analyses, I want you to be able to use this course to support your group project. So there will always be an option to allow you to do an analysis for your group project as part of the assignment, or for PhD students, an analysis that directly supports your dissertation. But for those that aren't doing anything, that are not going to be using multi-criteria decision analysis, then there'll be kind of a standard exercise for you to work through that as well. Let's see, I've talked about the lab. Yeah, so any questions about or comments or anything about? And this syllabus is on the course webpage. Yeah.
So you mentioned the second part about the spatial analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Would you do, and of course there is a temporal analysis. Can we, if it suits us, can we take temporal rather than spatial, or your comments?
So we'll definitely be doing spatial, but we can talk about doing temporal as another option for sort of time series analysis as another option at the end. And we can, yeah. So that's but you're thinking about for the homework in that section.
Yeah, I think for my PhD work, I might that right now it looks like that could be more suitable than spatial or spatio-temporal if we can just combine the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of the tools will do translate from one to the other, but there's some that are very specific to one or the other. So we can sort of talk about that as the work goes on.
I'd like to second the vote for time series analysis.
Okay.
I think that was that in the original class description? I thought I saw a time series.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
I support that.
Okay. So let's just take a quick look at the course webpage. You all have used Gaucho Space. So this is where all the action will be. And so I've got try to get I'll try to have sort of details fleshed out at least a week ahead of time, and you can see from this course kind of my placeholder for the topics in each week. And as I say, this may change as some topics go faster or slower than I anticipate. The due dates for the assignments are on here. So basically, the first two assignments are due the Thursday after that sort of unit is completed. Okay, so on basically on week 4 for assignment 1 and week 7 for assignment 2, and then the last assignment is due on the Tuesday of exam week. There's no exams and there's no final paper or anything like that. Okay. So let's so the next thing I want to do is, since I don't know all of you or don't know all of you well, and there's a mixture of master's and PhD students, so I imagine that even you all don't know each other that well. So we'll start with a round of introductions, and what I'd like you to tell us is your name, if you're a master's student in the Bren School, your specialization, and your group project. If you're a PhD student, who your advisor is, and whatever you know about your dissertation topic, depending on how far along you are, or what you imagine your dissertation topic would be. And then if you're neither of those, you're from another department or another university visiting, just where you're coming from and what you're working on. Then if you have any idea of kind of the data analysis tools that you think you will need for your group project or your dissertation, mention those. And this will be your way of starting to harvest information about how to structure the last part of the class. And then just for fun, what's your favorite dessert? Okay, so let's, is Sean? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm Sean. I'm a second-year master's at Bren and specializing in conservation planning. And my group project is Tejon Ranch fire management with Frank Davis. And I think probably the most likely statistical analysis we'll do is some spatial analysis. And my favorite dessert is probably tiramisu.
Okay. Giuliano?
I don't think he's here yet.
Not here, okay. Clara?
I'm Clara. I'm a master's student specializing in coastal marine resources management. My group project is looking for sustainable direction for the coral reef marine wildlife trade. And we're going to be doing some kind of economic analysis and haven't really figured out the statistics for it yet.
Okay.
And my favorite dessert is ice cream.
Which flavor?
Chocolate.
Okay. Michelle? Jorge?
I'm Jorge Cornejo. I'm PhD student in the Marine Science program, interdepartmental graduate program in Marine Sciences. First task is remember the name. I'm working fisheries with Steve Gaines, my advisor. I'm going to use probably time series and GLMs in my dissertation. And I don't have actually a favorite dessert. I like them almost all.
Okay. Eric?
I'm Eric Fournier. I'm a second year PhD student, and right now I'm working on a project with Frank Davis and Roland Geyer on spatially explicit RCA. So I sort of could benefit from the, the in-depth discussion of some of the spatial statistics that you're going to introduce. And my favorite dessert, I'm a big chocolate milk fan.
name is Sheetal Gavankar. I'm a third year PhD student. Roland Guyer and Simon Su are my co-advisors. What else?
What's your topic?
Yes, so my interest lies in the early evaluation of advanced technologies and applications. Prior to joining Bren School, I worked in semiconductor industry for a number of years, so that's why I chose that. And I am looking at the existing tools under industrial ecology and how we can use them proactively before the fact rather than ex ante. So I am looking at these techniques, especially MCDA, in a way how we can pick and choose various early indicators and how do we weigh them and how could one incorporate them, especially at policy level, into the early decisions about technology. And that's where I'm going to start. And I'm also interested in the Bayesian statistics because I am looking at developing sets of necessary and sufficient conditions, and I think Bayesian statistics will come handy, especially when there is only qualitative data and it needs to be incorporated either as qualitative or coded quantitatively. So.
Okay. And you mentioned also you're interested in time series analysis.
Yes, I am. Well, yeah.
And your favorite dessert?
Oh, I like desserts made out of mango. Anything.
Kurt?
Kurt Hines, second year master's student here, and my group project is we're looking at renewable energy and energy storage options at Vandenberg Air Force Base. So parts of the class that I think that would be beneficial for us would be the multi-criteria decision analysis. I also think spatial and temporal analysis, and perhaps Bayesian analysis, say common filtering, incorporating observations into models. And my favorite dessert, this summer I acquired a fondness for Swiss chocolate, so.
Okay, Eleanor? Claudia?
I am Claudia. I am a visiting scholar at the Brand School, and in particular, I'm here to take part at games lab events activities, and I am participating to Pisco project, and in particular to recruitment of invertebrate and fish at Channel Highland Marine Protected Area. I come from Sicily, so my preferred dessert is cassata, obviously.
Kyono?
My name is Kyono. I am fourth year PhD student in high school, and my advisor is Christian Peck, and my research is to investigate the effect of climate change on ecosystem in mountain area. And particularly I'm interested in spatial interpolation technique, since I have been collecting a lot of spatial data for my PhD. And
Your favorite dessert?
Cheesecake.
I think we'll have to have a potluck at the end of the quarter. Kelly?
I'm Kelly Ueda. I'm a PhD student in the San Diego State UC Santa Barbara Joint
second year NUSM student here at Brown. My group project is energy performance of green buildings in collaboration with students from the University of Nanjing in China. And that's working with Warren Young and Sarah Anderson. I'm not sure on our specific techniques for data analysis, so we're still exploring that. And for dessert, I have to pick Irish coffee.
And John?
It's Chang.
John?
Yeah. I'm Chang. I'm also a second year master's student at Brown, and I'm in the same GPS app, so I don't need to introduce. I think that's it. My specialization is environmental politics and economics. My favorite dessert, I think, is vanilla ice cream.
Okay, Trevor?
Yeah, I'm Trevor Zink. I'm a second year PhD student working with Roland Geyer. Two things I'm interested in. First of all, sort of developing and quantifying the idea of the green business plan. So what is the green business and how do you measure that? So I think MDCA will be useful for that. I'm also interested in looking at trying to quantify displacement relationships in life cycle assessment. So when you have a more green material that's produced, how much of the old, less sustainable material does it actually replace? It's not what I'm interested right now. So looking at sort of partial equilibrium economic models for that. And I'm not a huge fan of dessert, but I have noticed at restaurants, anytime anyone orders a dessert, somebody, usually multiple people at the table, always have to say, "Oh my God." You notice that? Somebody's always very just shocked with the size of whatever dessert it is. There's always an "oh my God" comment or whatever dessert.
There are some restaurants where that's especially common.
Claim jumper.
Yeah. Okay, who have I missed? Yeah.
My name is Hui Peng. I'm from China. I'm a visiting PhD student. I just arrived US this month. I will be in Brown for a year. My advisor here is Christian Tan. And I'm working on the eco-hydrology modeling and analysis in northwest part of China. And my favorite dessert, I think, is chocolate cake.
Okay, do you have any idea what analytical tools you would most like to learn? What statistical tools you would most like to learn?
Oh, I think the R.
Okay, anybody else? Dr. Frew?
Let's see. Kim Frew, I'm a 14th year professor. Interested in spatial statistics. Interested in, if I get to vote, I vote for Bayesian analysis. Let's see, I want to find out as much about statistics as Bruce found out about GIS. But here, dessert is Art Bay.
What?
Single malt whiskey.
Okay. Everybody? My favorite dessert is, well, it varies, but usually it's creme brulee.
Chili powder. Oh, try that.
Yeah. Okay, so somebody mentioned R. So we need to figure out, all right, well, help me to know who knows what, or who is at least been exposed to what software. So how many of you have used R? So more than half. And those of you who did, so you used R in 206 last year? So what, did you use any kind of interface to R, or were you just typing stuff directly into the command line? Were you using TinR or?
Some people were using some. It wasn't required though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or just cutting and pasting from Notepad?
Or yeah, just saving it in like a text editor, running a script or whatever.
Okay.
Have you ever used RStudio?
Yes, I had, has anybody else here used RStudio? It's actually, well, it has its limitations, but it is easy to do. I think at the moment it's not installed on the lab machines, although I may see about getting it installed. It sort of puts together a simple text editor and the command window and the graphics output to a data explorer. So
It's called RStudio?
RStudio, yeah, and it's free. I think it only runs on Windows.
Uh-huh.
Oh no, it's on Mac too.
on everything.
Okay.
It's on Java, I think.
What was the other one? TinR, you called it?
TinR,
Like the metal tin, T-I-N?
TINN.
Not notepad. Tin. This is not notepad. Oh.
it's a open, I think open source, way over featured text editor that was, I think, hoping to be the your freeware text editor for all code development, but I don't know how much uptake it's actually had. And how about ArcGIS? So about half. Um,
What about MATLAB?
Okay, what about MATLAB? Because you use MATLAB. Fine. I wasn't planning to use MATLAB as a teaching tool, but if you are more familiar with MATLAB than with, say, R, at least some of the analyses you can do with MATLAB as well. I don't know if we have the statistics toolbox installed in the lab. If you don't, then that makes the functionality kind of considerably less for some of these.
Yeah, not really, not really tied to R, like, if you can do it in your preferred language.
Yeah, no, if you can, for the assignments, if you can do it in something else, that's fine. I just will be less able to help out. But I know, yeah, especially for PhD students, often you've got something else that you're already working on. And then, okay, so people who are not, who don't already have a Bren computing account, you need to come see me in the class so we can get you set up to work in on the lab machines. So, try to remind you about that. Okay, any other kind of questions about logistics or?
Your
why
office
we're here?
hours.
Hmm?
What are your office hours?
Oh, good question. I haven't set them yet. I will look at my calendar and see what I can come up with. But until I set them, you know, you can just contact me anytime and try to set it up at time. But generally, what I find is when I set office hours, nobody comes in anyway.
You too, huh?
Right. Okay, so we'll dive into, we've got about 40 minutes. We'll dive into multi-criteria decision analysis, or MCDA, sometimes called MCA, or multi-criteria analysis. And so some of you have an economics background. All of the students have taken at least 1.5 courses in all the master's students take at least 1.5 courses in economics. So of course, if you can reduce everything to a common currency, all you need to, and you're sort of looking at a variety of options in, say, cost-benefit analysis, you just need to find the option that has, you know, the best overall score in cost minus, or benefits minus costs. And likewise, if you have sort of two quantities that you're looking at, say, that are not necessarily on the same score, like it could be cost versus, you know, biodiversity, you can still kind of look at a trade-off curve and identify more or less desirable places to be on that trade-off curve. once we start getting to lots and lots of criteria for that go into a decision or a prioritization, and some of them may not even be quantitative, then it becomes a bit more challenging. And so because it is a challenging process, there have been many models and techniques developed over the years. There's probably at least 30 MCDA models out there. Some of them have very odd-looking names because they're acronyms in French. The French were early pioneers in this field, and there generally is there's no like one right answer saying, this is the right way to solve this problem. So it's even more so than other areas of statistics. It's really much more of an art. But just to get us, just to sort of get us thinking about, less abstractly, let's just think about the kinds of criteria that go into a hard problem. So let's think about criteria. So a decision that you all have made in the recent past is where to go to graduate school. So what were some of the criteria that you thought about as you were making that decision?
Cost.
Cost. Okay, and that is measured as dollars. And cost of what?
Tuition.
Housing. Anything else?
Also cost of opportunity. You're going to give 5 years.
Okay, so that's actually more the question of whether to go to graduate school.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. Another cost for some people is transportation, right? It's a long way. If you're looking at school, it's a long way from home. Okay, so that's kind of the easy one, right? We can add up all those numbers and get a good sense of what the cost is like. What other factors go into it?
Standard of life or quality of life.
Okay, and how do you measure that?
Happiness.
Okay, but so each of us is actually going to have a different sort of set of things that matter for this, right? So when each, so what do you think of? I mean, what are important things for you that give you a high quality of life?
Small town, not high traffic, clean air, go to the beach.
Okay. Any other quality of life
Weather.
indicators?
Weather.
I'm just gonna put desert snow as not a sub bullet, but its own bullet.
Okay.
So I guess that's covered under weather.
I think a big one would be if there's an advisor that does work relevant to your interests.
Okay. And that's going to be important for PhD students. It's probably less important for MESM students, given the way that the MESM program is structured.
The quality of schools. The
Quality of the school. Okay. So location in the sense of, you know, East Coast versus West Coast, or, you know, being close to the beach versus,
Well, either.
yeah.
Number of publications
Number of publications by who?
by your program or advice or other grad student.
Okay. Yeah, so this might be one measure of quality.
Career service.
Hmm?
Career service.
Career services.
Funding?
Hmm?
Funding?
Funding? Yeah.
Maybe another measure of school quality can be the number of projects.
Okay.
So as part of location, spouse or family, location,
Right.
constraints.
So, let's see, so I asked you to list the things that were sort of most important to you, and of course, you're all here, so you tend to list things that by and large UCSB scores well on. Are there any things that you gave up to come here that might have been important? Yeah.
Well, I gave up living in Santa Cruz, and there's lots of waves to surf every day there, and there's not waves every day here.
Okay.
So,
And another one might be, for those of you who are interested in policy, access to DC. Right, it's an area that could be important, and it's not, you know, both for you as an individual and sort of the kind of projects and things that faculty here are doing, where you're not, you know, we're not DC focused the way that some of the environmental schools on the East Coast are. Okay, so how many of you listed out all these things, scored them, put weights on them, and, you know, for each of the schools you were thinking about it?
Well, not exactly like this, but I guess subconsciously we all did it.
Right, right. So you clearly, I mean, hopefully most of you thought about most of these issues, or at least those issues that are important to you. You know, one of the advantages of just writing things down is that you sometimes realize that there's issues you haven't thought about. You know, when you're making a decision for yourself, you kind of go with a lot of gut feelings and kind of internal, informal assessments of what's more important. And that's fine for most of our personal decisions. But when we're making decisions that affect other people, and especially as, you know, in the context of policy, and, you know, we are the policymakers, or we're helping the policymakers reach a hard decision that they need to defend to the public, to the stakeholders, to whoever. There needs to be some sort of more formal approach. And if we're not just one person making this decision, but a group of people making the decision who may have different values on things like the relative importance of cost and quality of surfing, then we need to have some way of kind of taking everybody's opinion into account and aggregating in some sensible and mutually agreeable way. And so that's basically what multi-criteria decision analysis tries to do, right? It's going to take a set of criteria and a set of alternatives, right? If there's only one school that offers the program you want to go to, then there's no decision to make. I mean, the decision to make is to go or not, but it's not a decision between Santa Barbara versus Duke, right? So you have a set of alternatives, and then you try to either come up with some kind of score for each alternative on each criterion, or at least rank the alternatives on each criterion. So Santa Cruz is better than Santa Barbara in surfing. Michigan would be worse than Santa Barbara on surfing, right? Even if you can't put a number on.
Or so in Durham.
Well, yes, sir. So you can just come up with some rank for each of those criteria, and then figure out what to do from there. So we often, I mean, I sort of talk about this as decision making, and this is often talked about as a decision support tool. The support comes about because often those of us who are doing these analyses, kind of putting numbers on things and combining them in various ways, are not actually the final decision maker. And the decision maker, whatever list of criteria we come up with, the decision maker may well have other factors in his or her head, political factors, and so forth. And so usually our goal, if we're at the stage of providing this sort of technical support to a decision process, our goal is not to say, here's the answer. Our goal is to say, here is a way of thinking about the problem, and here are the solutions that score highly by this set of criteria versus the ones that don't. So other things that often kinds of problems that can be dealt with this multi-criteria analysis. So simply sorting various alternatives into say classes like unacceptable versus possibly acceptable versus definitely acceptable, right? So not necessarily saying this one's the best, but saying, we should take these ones out of consideration because they just don't make the cut. And sometimes that's some of that sorting is so obvious that we do it without even thinking about it, right? If you're looking at, if you want to be a PhD student, you're not going to look at any of the Cal State campuses because they don't offer PhDs, right? That just reduces your decision set right there. Right. But most of the Cal States don't offer PhDs, or if they do, it's through. And so you can say that those are unacceptable. You can also think about it as just a sort of screening process. So you start off with a long list of alternatives. You just want to narrow it down to a smaller set and examine them carefully. You can then rank the alternatives from best to worst. You can say this is the best alternative, and most of what we'll be talking about is sort of looking at, you have a discrete set of choices, discrete set of alternatives, but another thing you can do is once you've laid out all these criteria, and you say, well, there's trade-offs. There's no place is perfect, but if I imagine what the perfect school to go to would be, it have all these criteria, and then with those criteria in mind, you can go out and look again. Or if you're not limited to sort of solutions that are out there, pre-existing programs, but if we're So with that background in mind, what I'm going to do is sort of talk about a handful of approaches that are kind of representative of different classes of how you do this problem. So obviously, if all we have is ranking, then there's less we can do. The sort of things we can do with that ranking are different than if we actually had quantitative scores on all of these things. So part of the decision about what tool to use is based on what kind of data you have, what kind of information you can get about each of these criteria. But it's also, some of them are useful for sort of a quick screening to reduce the option set, and then do the hard work of finding all that data in a more limited option set. So we'll go through these from sort of simplest to most complex, I suppose. And every one of these things, there's 30 or 40 kind of these models out there. Every one of them was developed to solve a particular problem, and the person who developed that solution tends to think that that's the best way to solve this class of problems. And so there's a lot of, you look in the literature and everybody's sort of promoting their tool. On top of that, most decision analysis is not in the environmental field, it's in the business field. Okay, and so a lot of these people have written software to implement their tool, and then they sell it for lots of money. So there's lots of specialized software out there. It's all really expensive because it's aimed at the business world, and for a lot of it. Yeah.
When you talk about coming up with like the best possible solution, or sort of decision set, compare sort of your options to in terms of like operational research, maybe optimization.
Yeah, so a lot of this comes out of operational research, which is a field in the business world.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In whatever little literature I read on MCDA, everybody is talking about uncertainty, and it's not clear to me whether they are talking about uncertainty of within the data itself, or uncertainty of not having data. So can you just?
Right. So right. So if we don't have data, if we can't quantify the scores, how a particular option scores, then there's a whole set of techniques that we can't use. If we can't even rank a set of alternatives by particular criteria, right? If we don't even know enough, if we can't, if none of the schools, or most of the schools, have no information on placement statistics, then we're not even going to be able to rank the schools on the basis of that, and at which point it becomes a criterion that we can't use. So complete lack of information. If there's no information at all, we can't use it. But if the information is uncertain, in the sense that, and this becomes a real issue when we're trying to make decisions about the future, right? Because the future is uncertain. We don't know that a particular policy option. We have an idea of what we think the outcome will be, but we might be wrong. The analysts might be wrong. So methods to incorporate that kind of uncertainty, that our ranking might be, either our quantitative scoring or even our ranking might be wrong. There are techniques that try to take that into account. That those are less well developed than the ones I've mentioned about today.
Yeah, but what you described just now is the lack of data. What I was wondering about is the gaps in data. So on the one hand, you have you have all the data, but there's uncertainty of the data point, whether or not how data was collected and whether it's a solid data. So that's one part of uncertainty. On the other hand, you have gaps in the data. You have some data, but you don't have that data for everything that you're trying to. So, and then of course lack of data is a completely different story.
Right, right. But if you have data gaps, if you have placement statistics for 2 of the schools but not the other 3 that you're looking for, I think the only that means that you can't use placement statistics for sort of a global ranking of the schools. You can only use that when you're doing an analysis, a pairwise analysis of those schools where you have that information. So I think there's not any that I'm not aware of sort of formal tools for dealing with that. I think you just have to conceptually, when you have those data gaps, you can only use those. You sort of have to be creative about saying, well, here's an analysis of the schools that don't have that information. Here's sort of the relative ranking of the schools that do have that information, and then you kind of have to use your judgment when you go from one group to the next. Yeah, as far as I know, there's not much more you can do. So an example that we can use. So this is just a fairly simple case study. I mean, the description is long. I don't mean for you to read it all, but basically the idea is there's a small river in New England that has a bunch of contaminated sediments, and they need to. It's been decided that these sediments need to be dredged. I think in order to maintain kind of the navigability of the river. And so the question is what to do with these contaminated sediments. And there were 4 kind of options put on the table. Use the sediments to restore wetlands by surrounding them and sort of capping them with clean material and then creating habitat. Make cement out of it. And create a kind of a brownfield site where you just dispose it. And then this last one has to do with, I don't know, kind of mixing it with cement to create a more stable fill material that should stay, that the contaminants should stay bound to the site. Okay, so this all has to do with taking contaminated sediments out of the river, putting it somewhere on land, and how do we contain the contaminants. And so the sort of predicted outcomes of these 4 approaches were evaluated on 4 criteria: cost, the sort of resulting environmental quality, whether it adds ecological habitat, whether it adds habitat for humans. I think the idea is that this upland disposal somehow gets turned into a park or something like that. And so each of them gets scored on this, and then they sort of, in this case, I think you can sort of think of 4 different stakeholder groups and how they would, how much weight they would put on these different criteria, right? Because we wouldn't necessarily weight all criteria evenly, although that's what this last scenario looks at. But you can think of an environmentalist who puts a high value on human health, the sort of commercial interest that puts a high value on cost, having a low cost, and so forth. Okay, and so we can think about how to rank these 4, which of these seems preferable. So as we go through the different techniques, we sort of think about this case study, and so that here's a printout. You can look at it when I take it off the screen. So let me keep one. So the simplest approach is called non-dominated set analysis, or NDS. Okay, and the idea here is that you want to if you compare any pair of alternatives, if one of the alternatives is better by at least one criterion and is not worse by any other criterion, so there may be ties, but it's not worse, then that first alternative, you could say it outranks the second alternative. So if we look, for example, at let's see, the example was cement manufacturer versus flowable fill. Okay, so cement manufacturer is better on the cost characteristic because low cost is good. It's also better on the environmental quality. The environmental quality is high versus medium. And then on the other two criteria, they have exactly the same score, so they're tied. Okay, so by that analysis, you would say that cement manufacturer was better than flowable fill. Okay. And so if you and in particular, what this allows you to do is it may allow you to eliminate some alternatives that are worse than all of the other alternatives. I think that's what happens with flowable. Anyway, so you can sort of use this as an as a way to reduce the set of potential options. And it usually doesn't get you much more than that unless you just have a couple of alternatives.